Okay, now let's spend some time understanding, the processing part and the component that does it, which is called the processor or processors, because there might be more than one depending on how complicated the situation is. Okay, so redrawing our diagram, there was a sensor involved that took the physical quantity, converted it into electrical. Then there was an ADC, converted continuous stuff into numbers, bits, um, uh, bits grouped together representing a number, integer number. And then that, kind of goes into the CPU, the processor essentially. And this is a simplified version, by the way. As we'll see, this whole processor block, the processing block, is the deal. That is what we want to program. Then this sends out to like DAC, and then that goes back to the actuator, like this, whatever. Oh, fine. Okay, so what is this CPU? Why do we need it? How it came about, right? So back in time, uh, decades ago, when the CPUs were not too cheap, let's say, the way electronic circuits were made was we had the sensor, then we had the circuit directly, and then we had the actuator. We only had this. And this circuit here was analog circuit, and it was made, well, again, there are like n number of ways to make something, but majorly the computation part was done by um, op amps. What is op amps? Well, you can look them up online. It's called operational amplifiers. So what is so special about operational amplifiers? By the way, the symbol for op amps is something like so, and then this is one input, this is another input, this is the power supply, this is the output, whatever. So the thing about op amps was that they allowed us to do mathematical operations, addition, subtraction, multiplication, logarithms, exponents, all those kind of things. And turns out, because you can do mathematical operations now, well, you can feed in the inputs coming from the sensors, and it can do mathematical operation on that and give you the output. And this output was, you know, continuous. So we did not need this ADC and DAC stuff. Okay, so for a long, long time, this is the kind of circuits that we had. And then came a revolution. Well, the exact timing of that revolution is not known to me, but the idea was revelation, review. The idea was, the key idea. Let's put it that revolutionary idea. Sometimes I struggle with words, so pardon me for that. Okay, so the question was, hey, instead of operating on these continuous values, can I just sample those and then do the math the usual way? Instead of having an op amp, I can just collect numbers and then operate on those numbers, do the same math, but do it in the digital domain. But why would you do it in the digital domain? Well, it turns out, if I have a CPU, a processor, so what is a CPU? Okay, exploring that question before answering why we used. So a CPU is essentially a machine. It's an electrical, solid state machine that can read instructions, and it can do operations. It can do manipulation of the numbers. The good thing about this is this machine is always fixed. A CPU is a CPU. It's capable of reading instructions. And these instructions and data, so to speak, well, they live in a memory which can be changed. So you can now tweak your solution. If you want to tweak a solution that is based on op amps, yeah, good luck, because you need to change the op amps, change the circuit. And given that your circuit was on a motherboard, on a PCB printed circuit board, well, you got to manufacture a new PCB. very expensive, very complicated, and updates very hard to do. But this allowed for a way to experiment a lot more, fix the tweaks in the production line. So the CPU based solution then is a lot more flexible. It's a lot more better. And turned out that if you created a CPU, if you made a CPU in mass scale, the cost of that would be cheaper than designing the actual entire analog circuit. So it's cheaper as well in general. And we'll talk about the how cheap can it get also. But so that's one, there are many advantages to going digital. And so what people did was introduce these two layers. The losses that come with that, we were okay with it. In majority of the cases, we are okay with it. If you want to like create an oscilloscope, which is like gigahertz capable, signal probing capable and all of that, maybe there you have to, do many things still in the analog domain, but that's still a very tiny portion of it. It's not that analog circuits are not around anymore. Obviously, they are. It's just that the central decision-making block tends to be a CPU as much as possible. 99.99% cases, again, don't ask me how I came with that number. In majority of the cases, it would be a CPU doing the computation. So that's why we need a CPU. Now, what you should be clear about CPU is a CPU processor effectively can read from a memory code or data. It can read that, it can manipulate the memory, and also it can manipulate the environment, sense and actuate. How it does it will slowly, come to that. I understand that it's not very clear how the sensing can be done, but when we come to the idea of memory mapped IO, for example, we'll understand how this works. Okay, so the CPU then is our friend, and then the question is, this programming of the CPU is what I would say 90-95% of embedded systems engineering right now is. The rest 5%, or let's say 10%, like minority of it, is the actual PCB design, then sensor design and all of that. A majority of people in the embedded systems domain are essentially writing programs for CPUs at different levels, and what those levels are, we'll talk about later. So for this lecture then, what I wanted to do was suggest what are our options for CPU, what kind of CPUs are popular these days. And when I say CPU, it's representing a core, a processor core. What kind of cores do we have? What kind of processing elements do we have in the market that we can use, and the popular ones. So majorly the M class of CPUs from ARM. We'll talk about all classes of CPUs in a bit. So they are extremely popular. Then there is RV32, it's RISC-V based. And again, what these mean, we'll talk about that also. Then there is, again from ARM, we have the A class CPU, we have the R class CPU, and not only this, well, we also have the x86 and the x64 from Intel AMD, right? So for the next lecture, maybe our goal can be, or some future lecture, our goal can be, okay, what does it mean, to have these different CPUs? What do they really mean? What differs? What are the different things? We'll touch upon that. For now, the idea is this, that because everyone was free to design their own CPUs once upon a time, they decided what the instruction would look like. So instruction, after all said and done, CPU is reading the memory. Memory has zeros and ones, so it brings in those zeros and ones. looks at them, like let's say 16 or 32 bits, it looks at those and be like, huh, what instruction is this conveying to me? So is it add, is it subtract, is it multiply, what? So that pattern of zeros and ones is called the instruction encoding, and the CPU looks at that and decide what it needs to do. Now, if you haven't guessed already, the instruction encoding for these different CPUs is different. That is one. That is the major difference. Different. That is the major difference. And their internal design is also different, given the decoding. Some are great at low power applications, some are great at running complex software, some are royalty free, some are proprietary, that kind of thing comes in. But these are the major CPU, so to speak, ISAs, instruction set architectures, that are out there in the market. And I would argue that these are the most important ones, the most famous ones or popular ones for embedded applications. The A class CPUs is A and R class CPUs are more for complicated embedded systems like laptops, mobile phones, watches, cameras, car infotainment systems. You know, these are used there. And the M class CPU typically performs M class CPU or the RISC-V 30, the RV32 based CPUs, they are involved in performing more of an abstracted, single task. What that means, it'll become clear with examples in the future. And then x86 and 64 primarily used in server and desktop applications. Has to do with the fact that whatever they are proprietary, didn't become popular in embedded use cases and all of that. But okay, what I wanted to then focus on is the role of CPUs, why CPUs were a thing, they became a thing when it comes to embedded applications, and why everything is not analog circuit, and what are the different possibilities of CPUs that we might have to look into. Now, obviously, we wouldn't go and deep dive into all of these CPUs, but I would give you an overview of which CPUs used where and for what. And that will become very obvious actually when we come back to our SoC, well, our board here. So my claim is, and we are going to dive into the documentation of this. So this is again the SoC. My claim is that this has the A class CPU, it has the R class CPU, and then we have the Wi-Fi module here. My claim is that might have R or M class CPU. Then we have, somewhere there is an Ethernet controller that would have a CPU also. So in this context, in case of this board, it is complicated enough that it has several CPUs of different kind. In fact, later I'll show another development board which has the RISC-V CPU but 64-bit. The one I quoted on the whiteboard on the page, RV32, that's the 32-bit variant, but then there is also 64-bit variant which is capable of running your Chrome browser and things like that. We'll talk about all of this as we move forward. So the second point then from this lecture I want you to remember is complex systems can actually have more than one CPU, many CPUs. In fact, I would say there are more M-class CPUs on the planet than us humans. You are possibly surrounded with like hundreds and thousands of those right now. Thousands depends on where you are, but hundreds definitely. Your TV would have a lot of them, the monitor would have a lot of them, your laptop, desktop, iPad, or phone that has like easily 10 to 25 of those. So it's very popular, and there's some engineer programming those, teams of engineers programming those. Anyways, hopefully I've hammered the point home. What we'll do next is dive into this concept of SoC and how people deal with the complexity. Now, before I leave you, I forgot to mention that the pins that you see here we call them GPIO, general purpose input output, and these are used to interface, sensors, actuators, all those kind of things. Right? So in context of this board, then the pins are ways to take in information from the real world and give it out there. Now again, there are complicated input systems also. For example, I believe this or one of these connect to the camera subsystem. So camera is essentially now taking a picture from the real world and streaming that one picture or frames of pictures through this interface. So complicated IO system is also possible. But I wanted to kind of also highlight that the pins here would enable us to do the simple, sense process actuate kind of a thing on as experiments if you want to, right? So this board again goes as complex as booting a desktop environment. It can take us there, boot the Linux kernel and all of that. And it also allows us to run these simple experiments or make simple embedded systems while also being a beautiful vehicle to understand the complexity. All right, so with this, I pretty much want to conclude the lecture. And in the next one, let's dive into the documentation for this and head towards the concept of system on chip. All right, I'll catch you in the next one.